Florida crocodiles are being killed over and over again. Scientists discover this. By 2007, the American crocodile had recovered so well that the federal government downgraded it from endangered to threatened. Florida had done something right for once. Then the bodies started coming in, and the strange part was not how they died, it was that nothing had touched them. No bite wounds, no missing limbs. Adults in their prime, 4 meters of armored animal that nothing in North America can kill, lying in the shallows completely intact. A predator leaves marks. A boat leaves marks. These animals had none. When the lab opened them up, the answer was not in the wounds, because there were no wounds. It was in the tissue, and what was in the tissue had been building for 30 years. I'm Ambrose Wild. This channel goes where the official conservation numbers and the things field crews actually pull out of the water stop agreeing with each other. The first explanation came fast, and it was a good one. In January 2010, South Florida ran through nearly 2 weeks of record cold. Water temperatures in Florida Bay dropped into the low 50s. Manatees, sea turtles, snook, tarpon and tilapia floated belly up in the canals by the thousand. Burmese pythons died in numbers that made national news. And crocodilians died too, because unlike the American alligator, the American crocodile is a tropical animal, sitting at the northern edge of its range. It barely belongs this far north. Cold stress fit everything. It kills without leaving a mark. It takes big animals and small ones. It hits exactly the shallow water where these crocodiles live. So the working theory became that Florida's crocodile recovery had run into a bad winter, and that the population would absorb it and keep climbing. The state kept counting nests and reporting a success story. But cold stress has a signature, and when researchers went back through the recovery records, that signature was missing. A freeze kill is a spike. Everything dies inside the same week in one winter. These deaths were spread across every season, including August. A freeze kill also takes the small animals first, because a hatchling loses heat far faster than an adult. These losses were concentrated in prime breeding adults, the exact animals a population cannot afford to lose. And a cold kill leaves the internal tissue clean. Necropsies on these crocodiles came back with organ damage that had taken years to develop. So it was not trauma, and it was not weather. Then what kills a 4-meter apex predator slowly, in warm water, in every month of the year, and leaves the outside of the animal perfect? The answer showed up in an animal that was still alive. During a night survey in the canals south of Miami, a crew pulled a juvenile crocodile out of the water and knew immediately the numbers were wrong. Its tag said it had hatched 2 seasons earlier. A 2-year-old American crocodile in good water should be pushing a meter. This one was barely half that. The first thing was the size. Not thin and not starved in the way a food shortage starves an animal. Stunted. It had built almost nothing since the day it hatched. The second thing was the skin. Along the jaw and behind the front limbs, the scales had cracked and lifted, and what was underneath was raw. That is what an animal drying out from the inside looks like. But the detail that mattered most was inside its mouth. American crocodiles carry salt glands on the tongue, small pores that push excess salt back out of the bloodstream. On this animal, those pores were rimmed with visible white crystal. The gland was not failing, it was running flat out, and it was still losing. And if a 2-year-old in the nursery was already losing that fight, the 4-meter adults had been losing it for decades. Look at that water. Clear, mangroves on both banks, exactly what a healthy crocodile canal is supposed to look like. On a scale of 1 to 10, how safe does that water look to you? Don't overthink it. First number that comes into your head, put it in the comments. The crew took blood and tissue and sent it out with a water sample from the same spot. Then everyone waited, because tissue chemistry does not come back overnight. While they waited, the reports kept arriving. An adult in one canal, 2 more the following month, and the crews started noticing something that made the waiting worse. Nesting was still happening. Females were still building mounds, still laying, still guarding. On paper, the population looked fine. That was the part nobody wanted to say out loud yet. When the water results came back, nobody needed the tissue panel to understand what had happened. Ocean water runs at roughly 35 parts per thousand salt. That is the number every marine animal in Florida is built around. The water these crocodiles were living in measured above 90. In the worst stretches, it pushed past 100. That is not brackish, and it is not seawater. That is close to 3 times the ocean, in a canal system thousands of animals were born into. Nothing had killed these crocodiles. They had been dehydrating every hour of their lives, surrounded by water they could not drink, in bodies working harder every day just to stay even. The tissue panel confirmed it. Chronic osmotic stress. Kidney and liver damage laid down slowly in animals that were otherwise untouched. They were dying of thirst in the middle of the water. To understand why that is so much worse than it sounds, compare the crocodile to the animal everyone confuses it with. The American alligator cannot handle salt. Its salt glands barely function, so it stays in fresh water and refuses to go where the water turns. That limitation is also its protection. An alligator will never be trapped in a hypersaline canal because it would never move into one. The American crocodile is the opposite. Those tongue glands are one of the most efficient salt excretion systems in any reptile on Earth, and they are the reason this species could colonize the coast, the mangrove edge, and eventually the canals people cut through them, which is the trap. The adaptation that made the recovery possible is the same adaptation that held these animals in water that was killing them. An alligator would have walked out in year 1. A crocodile does what it evolved to do. It stays, it processes, and it burns itself out doing it. And almost all of this was happening inside one structure. In the early 1970s, a nuclear plant on Biscayne Bay needed somewhere to put its waste heat without cooking the bay itself. So engineers cut a closed loop of cooling canals into the ground beside it. 168 miles of shallow water folded back and forth with no outlet. Nobody built that for wildlife. Crocodiles found it anyway, and within a few decades, those canals have become the single most productive American crocodile nesting site in the state. It went into the case file that downgraded the species in 2007. For 30 years, it stood as proof that industry and an endangered species could share ground. It was also a closed loop, with no outlet, in a place where the sun does not stop. Water leaves that system exactly one way, as vapor. The salt does not leave with it. So how does water end up saltier than the ocean sitting right next to it? It evaporates, and nothing dilutes it. Every year, those canals lose water to the sky and keep every gram of salt it carried in. In 2012 and 2013, the plant was uprated to run at higher output, which pushed more waste heat into the same canals. Algae bloomed, the water darkened, evaporation climbed, and salinity went vertical. But the canals are only half of this, and the other half is much older. South Florida spent the 20th century draining itself. Canals, levees, and pumps took the freshwater sheet that used to run south out of the Everglades and sent it east to the ocean instead. That flow was what diluted the entire southern coast. Take it away, and nothing is left to buffer anything. The crocodiles did not move into a dangerous place. They moved into a good one. And then the water changed underneath them. Now salt is what is killing these animals slowly. It is not the only thing turning up in the tissue work, and the second one is worse because it does not stay inside the crocodiles. Subscribe before we get to it, Because if you drink water anywhere in South Florida, that part of this story has your name on it. Agricultural operations north of the Everglades put sulfate into the water. Down in the wetland, bacteria take that sulfate and convert ordinary mercury into methyl mercury, the form that moves into living tissue and stays there. It climbs the food chain, concentrating at every step. Fish carry some, wading birds carry more, and an apex predator that lives 60 or 70 years carries more than anything else in the system, because it has had 6 decades to collect it. Nobody has published a full contaminant profile on Florida's adult crocodiles. That absence is not reassurance. It is a gap. And none of this stops at one canal system. The same hypersalinity has hit Florida Bay repeatedly, and the seagrass die-offs there in 1987 and again in 2015 ran on exactly this chemistry. Every crocodile nursery on the southern coast sits in that same water. Here is the part that should worry people most. Crocodile eggs have no sex chromosomes. The temperature of the nest mound decides whether a hatchling comes out male or female. Warm those mounds a couple of degrees and the ratio slides. Combine that with hatchlings already stunted and dehydrating through their first 2 years, and you get a population where the adult count holds steady for another 20 or 30 years, while almost nothing replaces it. Biologists have a name for that: extinction debt. The bill has already been run up. It just has not been presented yet. Then there is the plume. The hypersaline water did not stay in the canals. It sank because salt water is heavy and moved west underground toward the Biscayne Aquifer, where South Florida's drinking water comes from. Miami-Dade County issued a consent order over exactly that. The recovery wells are still pumping, and the cost runs into the hundreds of millions. Nothing in this story hunted anything. There is no invader here, and no predator that arrived from somewhere else. The crocodiles are doing precisely what they evolved to do, in the exact habitat they evolved for, and it is killing them, because we changed the chemistry of that water and then congratulated ourselves when they moved in. That is what makes the crocodile useful in the bleakest way possible. It sat in that water for 50 years and recorded it in its own tissue, and nobody read the recording until the bodies started coming in. Today, the canals look exactly as they did when we started. Clear water, mangroves, a healthy count of adults, an official status that still reads recovering. Everything in that picture says calm, and none of it is. So if you are ever in South Florida and you see a crocodile lying still in shallow water, understand that you are not watching an animal at rest. You are watching one running an internal machine at full output, every hour since it hatched, in water that we made. I'm Ambrose Wild. There are more of these here. The stories where the official number and the actual water stop matching and somebody finally goes and checks. Stay with us. We will keep checking.